Okay, good morning, everybody. I am looking forward to spending some time with all of you to talk about a very important topic in the Next Wave webinar series. We're talking about wiring the corporation, creating new pathways for disruptive innovation. And this is one of the things that is so important that I would say we've got a lot of people registered for this. One of the things we've learned in our research with the GCV Institute and Bell Mason Group is how successful corporations can wield the power of broad multi-level internal stakeholder networks to deliver value for both their parent corporation as well as their portfolio companies. So in this session, we're going to talk about a few examples of how some successful corporations have done that with our guests from BP Ventures and Capital One Ventures. And you'll hear them talk a little bit about the ways that they have approached their roles, mapping internal stakeholders, developing champions, co-creating collaboration models, and sharing responsibility and rewarding impact. So we've got two great speakers. I will introduce them and tell you a little bit more about them in just a few minutes, but they come from programs that have been quite active in the venture community, that have been very successful over time, and from the very beginning have established a systematic approach to developing a corporate venture business development capability to help ensure the success of their portfolio company investments. So we'll hear in a little while from Chad Bown, managing partner at BP Ventures, and Nicole Lapointe, the portfolio success lead at Capital One Ventures. So just to provide a little bit of context for our discussion before we kind of jump into the meat of it, I'd like to review a few concepts that are important to consider as we look at this topic. So first of all, if we look at the whole end-to-end process of investing and landing the value of portfolio companies, we operate in a very complex environment in which there are literally hundreds and hundreds of interactions to manage over time. And that includes both the discussions that happen within the CVC team and this landing capability, which you may or may not have in your organizations, but also with the external ecosystem involving the whole startup community and so on, as well as the corporate parent, executives, various shared services that are involved, and operating in this complex set of interdependent ecosystems requires careful attention to how you manage these relationships. And this has been one of the things that has really characterized what high-performing CVC programs do. They take this end-to-end approach that is so fundamental to both financial performance and to delivering the ultimate strategic impact that results in program longevity. And that may be one of the reasons why this topic is so much of interest today. We're seeing a little bit of economic turmoil and somewhat of a reset in the tech area. But one of the things that I think is that will be very interesting to watch is how corporate venture blossoms in this environment because of that network of deep relationships that we have and the resources of our corporations to be able to invest and add value to portfolio companies and to bring that value forward to the parent companies. So operating and navigating in this complex environment is really important. I would say another part of that is over the last few years, we've seen this blending of roles where you have the investing roles, which are kind of depicted at the top of this, the roles of landing that value, which are often covered in the portfolio business development and in the businesses and corporate functions that are involved in the innovation process. But what's really important is if you kind of look at the whole process or the pipeline of landing deals, kind of represented in the dark section in the middle, there are multiple opportunities for touch points for various corporate stakeholders and the deal teams to get involved with each other. And this makes it look like it's a kind of a sequential process, but it's more of an iterative process. But one of the things to think about throughout your whole process is where do you engage your key stakeholders? How are they engaged? Who is participating in each step of the process? What are their roles? And how do they help contribute to the platform that you're delivering for portfolio companies to be successful? And the organizations that do this well are able to attract higher quality deals, are able to deliver that value that results in financial returns that are very attractive, and they're able to demonstrate the ability to deliver impact for their parent corporation. That is the background of why many corporations have established their venture teams. One last slide that I'll kind of run into on this is another thing that I think makes this really complex and challenging is that in most corporations, the corporate venture group is not the only organization that's involved in the startup community or the internal innovation or external innovation activities. There are often many others that play a part in this whole process. And so you'll see in most corporations, there's groups that are focused on M&A, R&D, various alliances or licensing or those kinds of things. Just within the corporate venturing area, the things that are listed on the right-hand side of this slide, there are often many players involved. And the challenge with this is understanding who's doing what and finding a way that you neither duplicate resources or leave major gaps in the process. So it's really a matter of trying to understand who's doing what. Most corporate venture teams are rather small. And one of the things that I think the most successful organizations do is they tap into that broader network beyond the corporate venture team to kind of benefit from the goodness that their larger corporation can provide. And together, they're able to really make an impact with the investments that they're able to pursue and how they integrate those new disruptive solutions that they're seeking into the fabric of the corporation. So without any further ado, I will turn to our esteemed panelists who are going to join us today. I was really excited to have both Nicole and Chad because they take a different approach in each of their organizations to how they approach this problem in the way they've deployed some solutions. But there's also, I think you'll find a lot of commonalities in how they do this. So why don't we start with Chad, and I'll ask each of our guests to introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about their role in their organization, what they invest in, and how they approach business development. So we'll start with that. So Chad is based in Houston. He's calling in from London today. Welcome.
Good. Well, thank you, Lee, and thank you, GCV, for kicking off this series. I'm sure there's going to be much more good topics that come throughout this year. But wiring the corporation is critical. And I think, as we go through, as Lee talked about, this is a key component to seeing a successful CVC. But first of all, sorry, I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but Chad Bown, as Lee said, currently in London. It's actually sunny today, a little cold, but sunny, which is surprising for London. I've been with BP Ventures for going on 8, soon to be 9 years, and have kind of seen the transition that BP Ventures has been through. And we'll talk a little bit about that and how we've built out, a very robust network. We are investing about $200 million per year. And if we look at that in a fund cycle over 4 to 5 years, that's about $1 billion. In total, our portfolio value today is about $1 billion. We've been 30 active investments. We've invested in 60. We've had exits. We've had wind downs. We've invested across the spectrum from seed to Series D, even a Series E, I think, is we're doing a follow-on investment just recently. But truly in support of the business. We're here to make a financial return, but also to see our technologies deployed back in BP. We've got a team of 20 global. There's about 6 of us in Houston, multitude in the UK, and then others dispersed throughout the globe. And we have also had very strong support from our senior leadership, and that shows by having a venture team that has been in place since 2006, which is kind of surprising to see. But a part of that and part of that success was part of this, what we call wiring the corporation, which we'll talk about. Okay, I think that's a good intro. I'll hand it off to Nicole.
Thanks, Chad. Great to be here with you today. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. Lee, thanks for asking me to be here today. Really excited for this conversation. Just by way of introduction, I lead portfolio success for Capital One Ventures. As Lee mentioned, I've been working with startups in various roles for the past 10 plus years. Spent a good chunk of my time at InQtel as a program manager and managing startup development agreements. I've also spent a little bit of time in a startup incubator. A little bit more info about my role here on the ventures team and what we do. I've been on the team here for about 4 years, and our charge is, we are the strategic investor for Capital One, and we look to fund startups in data, technology, and financial services sectors. We were founded in 2014. We're a team of about 24 people, and we are actually part of Capital One. We have offices in 3 locations: New York, San Francisco, and DC. And we have about 70 companies in our portfolio to date. About 60% of our portfolio companies have engaged commercially with Capital One at one point in time. And, we think of ourselves at Capital One as having transformed into a technology company. And that's really enabled us to be an innovator and leader in the industry. And as such, we've found that bringing in innovative solutions from the outside, whether it's to integrate with or augment or learn from, has been super essential to our strategic growth. My team does not have a separate dedicated business development function. And so, because we are a small team, resource constrained, we've made portfolio development, part of everyone's role here on the team. And we can talk about how we've done that and how we've been able to successfully build up some really strong relationships that have helped fuel some great investments for us.
Okay, that's great. Thank you both for kicking this off. I know I've heard Chad talk in some of the GCV Institute courses that that he's been a guest expert in. And Chad's also a former GCV emerging leader. And I was looking at the write-up about that, Chad, and you talked about how your advice for CVC units was need to develop and execute a CVC strategy that balances strategic goals against financial goals, and also to think longer term from the initial investment through portfolio management and continue to kind of invest through that entire cycle over time. And when it's done correctly, it makes the CVC industry even stronger. And I know that at VP Ventures and also at Capital One Ventures, that this has been a focus, that's kind of been, I would say, kind of built into the DNA of your organizations for as long as they've been around, while the form might have changed a little bit. But I'd like to hear from each of you a little bit more about, how does your portfolio model work? And maybe kind of, let us look under the hood a little bit and see, how do you actually execute on your portfolio development activities? If it's part of everybody's role, if it's, how your networks work. So Nicole, I see you nodding your head. You want to maybe kick this off a little bit and talk a little bit about how it works at Capital One?
Yeah, sure. So our model very much starts with strategic intent coming from the business. It's super essential for us to understand what business needs are, what technology needs are. And we do that, primarily in one way, and that's through our relationships and our key stakeholders inside Capital One. We are, typically, almost always investing directly against a Capital One strategic imperative. And so it's been really important for us to build those relationships, to understand those imperatives, be able to prioritize the work, and figure out where startups can plug in to support those strategic areas. It's been part of everyone's role on the team, I say, because we don't have a separate biz dev function whose charge is to learn those things. It's really everyone's role. So that means the investment partner on our team, the product or technical SME or operating partner, or someone in my role on the portfolio success side of things.
Okay, that's great. So Chad, how about, want to talk a little bit about how you've approached this at VP and the network that you've built?
Yeah, sure. So I guess it's similar to how Nicole described it. the way I view it, we're not the experts. We're not the tech experts within BP. We've got 60,000 individuals that, depending on their, business unit, their focus, they're thinking about technology 24/7. And how do we bring that into BP? And so we really see the ventures as one of those arms. And I like the slide, Lee, that you showed at the end, which really showed each of the key departments that we work very closely with. So not just technology and business, but we've got M&A, we've got R&D, we've got licensing, we've got universities that we're also engaged in. And each of those has a role. And I see that as deal flow. It's amazing how much deal flow we actually get from our M&A group. With bankers bringing through ideas, and we test that very quickly with our experts in the business. But similar to Nicole, we don't. We currently hold two hats in our ventures team, and so the two hats being we're out chasing deals, putting together a ventures investment, sitting on the boards of those companies, and we're also trying to deploy that back in BP. And we've seen that as too much to do, to be honest. And so as part of our budget for this year, we've decided to get, as Nicole is calling it, kind of a biz dev strategic value team that's really going to be focused, working very closely with us, sitting in ventures, so not a separate team, but individuals that are working with the business to ensure that we're deploying the technology, we're getting direct feedback that this technology is working, not working, or the challenges that we're seeing, and to resource that effectively across 30 active investments is a tall ask. But what I would say is you've got to have close alignment. I think your other slide, invest in land. You can't just invest and then throw it over the fence. You've got to have engagement, and those folks, business development, strategic value, that are helping to engage with the business need to be very closely tied to the ventures team. I think that's how we've seen it be successful.
That's great. Well, I want to mention also that we are taking questions from the audience as we proceed with the webinar now. If you want to ask a question, there's a little Q&A tab that you can select. And in just a few minutes, I'll start to weave some of those questions that are coming into the conversation. I also just realized that in my kickoff, I neglected to properly introduce myself. I'm Lee Sessions, obviously, and I'm with the GCV Institute now, but my perspective really on this topic comes from being a practitioner and being in a role in a program that really made a priority of portfolio development. I spent most of my career at Intel Capital, where we had a very large portfolio at any given time. When I was running the team for a little bit more than a decade, maybe 12 years, we had about 400 companies in our portfolio. And similar to the way you described it, Chad, we had some that were, the investment professionals played a critical role in portfolio development, and sitting on the boards and working with the companies and so on, and connecting to the business groups. But we also had some activities that were kind of centralized that my team worked on, where we kind of tapped into the goodness of Intel as a company to bring those resources to bear for the portfolio companies for their good, if you will. And that included working with Intel's global sales organization, working with activities within the business groups, and some of the things that you just alluded to on the STAR model. And Nicole, when you talked a little bit, you mentioned some other roles that kind of you said something about venture development and other roles on the team that are playing a part in this besides the investment professionals. I don't know if you had anything more that you wanted to say about how what do you do to actually help the portfolio companies at Capital One? How does that play out?
Yeah, sure. So, portfolio success means, or success in general just means lots of different things for our portfolio companies. It doesn't always mean commercial adoption. And so one of the things that we work to do upfront prior to a deal closing is we work with our deal team inside Ventures to document and get a full picture on what success means for this investment. And so we can therefore determine after we do that if this is something that ventures can help with and help accelerate. And we recognize that there's not always something to be done up front when we make an investment. Sometimes it's a wait and see. Sometimes it's a let's bring a company in, do a series of demos, bring some learnings into Capital One. And on the other hand, sometimes we're investing at the same time that a commercial contract is closing with Capital One. And therefore, success looks different for that type of investment. I think where portfolio development comes into play is very much in that strategic planning piece that's done up front, as we look to say, where are the other opportunities inside Capital One? Who can we leverage? And how are we going to effectively form those relationships and accelerate success for this startup company. But to your point, Lee, it's not necessarily done by a specific person in ventures who's doing development. It's very much a team effort with our deal team.
So another question is, both of you, you invest in companies in multiple investment sectors or areas and at several different stages. And I know, different organizations approach investment in different ways. How do you approach this when you have some companies that you're investing without any kind of a business unit agreement, some ahead of an agreement, some the agreement may follow. What's your approach to working with companies at different sizes and stages and shapes and so on?
Yeah, I guess I could take that one. So we kind of have two parts to our investment thesis when engaged in the business, and they're both tied to strategy. So in the cases where the business is very clear in their strategy, we want to roll out 30,000 charging stations in the United States, and we need either the hardware or the software to do that. Our ventures team, working closely alongside that business, will invest. And as a part of that, we would like to see a commercial agreement because it's very clear. Here's a strategy. A business unit leader is engaged. And what's important about that for us as ventures is we want the business to help influence what that ultimate product looks like. And if it's good for BP, in our view, it's good for other companies and other customers. And we want our venture companies to be successful, not just with BP. So we call that informed by the business. So the business has a strategy. But we're also a venture capital team. We're looking 5, 10, 15, 20 years out in the future. And as a part of that, we're informing our strategy. So we're informing where the business could be headed. And in those scenarios, you can't put in place a commercial agreement. It's developing a hydrogen ecosystem that's maybe 5 to 10 years out. And so we've got a split from that set, and perhaps 50% we're informing strategy and 50% we're informed by. And in those informed by, businesses engage commercial agreement. But in the future, we still want technical expertise from the business on those informing decisions and engagement, but it's not dollars and cents that we're booking straight away in strategic value.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. Yeah, so I think both of you kind of mapped out your programs and your networks. I'm going to come back to that in just a second, but there's a few questions that I want to address that have popped up in the Q&A section. It's the tab to the left of the chat on your screen. So if you have other questions, please put them there. But and some of these I don't know if we can answer, but I'll just toss them out there. But how much attention do your major group level investors like BlackRock et al. Pay to your CVC activity and potential growth contribution, and how do you explain it to investors? So if I look at this question, I think the question is, how does your corporate venture business development activity, play out in terms of the value add that you can provide from your organizations? Do you see any connection between the work that you do to help your portfolio companies, not just with your parents, but with other co-investors or potential, co-investors? So I don't know if either of you have anything to share on that.
Yeah, I could go. For the most part, our co-investors see it as a must-have for us to be a co-investor. They want to see business engagement. either technical, either revenue from the business, or influencing. And so we've, invested in a geothermal company, and that was a key component to ensure that we've got subsurface experts helping in that project. And that was really got a lot of co-investors alongside as a part of that. Or it could be a carbon trading platform. And we've got carbon and offsets, and we want to trade through that platform. So I see it as usually majority of the time, if we've got strong engagement, that's good for all seasons and also for co-investors.
Okay, great. Anything to add, Nicole?
Yeah, on the Capital One Ventures side, I think folks really look towards the Capital One logo and brand as, being forward leading in the technology space. And so, as such, when we're investing, I think, both startups and our co-investors understand the work that we're doing on the back end to help make things successful. We're not a kind of set it and forget it kind of VC. We've got great relationships with our lines of business. I've heard directly from our startup companies, CEOs and founders, that's really what they value, is us being that intermediary and making those connections. And ultimately, I think that shines through as we've proven in several cases that we've been able to accelerate pilots and adoptions on behalf of those startup companies for Capital One because we've been an investor. Whether it's, helping a startup company navigate a procurement process or helping to get pilot resources assigned, or even, on the flip side, communicating back to a startup what they may need to do to scale inside an enterprise environment at Capital One.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I know you've talked in the past about how those activities have translated into real value increases for some of your portfolio companies. So maybe there's a chance to chat more about that later. So we've got tons of questions that are showing up in the Q&A, and I want to talk a little bit about, maybe I'll ask some of those questions and a few other things. So to start with, one of the questions is, with respect to business development teams sitting next to investment teams, are there tangible tools to motivate wider corporates to work with the portfolio companies rather than only exercising favors or strong arming them, if you will? But, how do you go about actually wiring the organization? And perhaps, you may or may not have any tangible tools to make that happen. I don't know if, Chad, maybe you can talk a little bit about how you've tapped into that you've built this kind of network.
Happy to do that, Lee. So at the start, I talked about where the ventures team, in a 60,000 person company in BP, we don't know everything. And there's a multitude of technologies and strategy that we've got to bring to the forefront. And so as about 5 years ago, we kind of looked at that and said, man, this is huge amount of, effort and push that we need to go out and find new technologies. But second, how do we filter that? How do we bring that back into the organization and get it sticky, get it to where it's, engaged with a business, they're excited about it, and we've got business sponsorship ready to go. And so we kind of looked in BP and said, well, how do we empower these very smart individuals and also individuals that are excited about doing new things, thinking outside the box, leaning into new tech without essentially bringing them onto our ventures team. And we essentially established a network of, we call them mavens. If you look up maven in the dictionary, that's usually the question I get. What's a maven? What's a maven? It's just an expert. It's an expert that, knows what they're doing and feels empowered to change and to bring change to their business. And so if we look across, BP, upstream, downstream, renewables, solar, wind, et cetera, we've gone to each of those business units. We've engaged with the senior leadership in those business units. So executive vice president and said, here's ventures. If you don't know about us, this is what we do. We've got this budget. This budget can be spent on behalf of you to accelerate technology. Who in your team would love to be a part of this and help us in supporting your business. And very quickly, that EVP is throwing out a multitude of names, and 1, 2, 3, however many you want to pick, but you also need to make sure that you keep it somewhat tight. This is a tight-knit group that you want to engage with, more than a few times a month. But out of that, we got a group across our business of, depending on the business unit, 10 to 20 individuals that know about ventures, are empowered by it, know our investment thesis, and want to use our capital for their tech development. And if you look at how they put it on their business, their My Plan, that's kind of our targets, our goals for the year. They've got it in their My Plan. We invite them to conferences, et cetera, et cetera. But through that, I would say, for all those listening, our best deal flow now comes internal. It comes from those experts that understand what we're doing, feel empowered, and know the tech that we're looking for, and are bringing opportunities to us. And for those, you can filter very quickly and know that you've got sponsorship to move from. So anyways, happy to answer more questions about that, but it's been very successful for BP Ventures.
Nicole, did you have something to say about that?
I'll mention one key group internally that's been really essential to us. Unlike BP, we don't have kind of an internally built and incentivized network. Hopefully, maybe that's something that we can work towards. But there is one key group that we've formed a tight relationship with over the past couple of years, and that's been our sourcing and supplier management team. At Capital One, they're the first, most likely the first line that receives any kind of request for information or for proposal. And so that's been a great way for us, not just to, expand our network internally, but to understand what's coming forward in terms of strategic needs and business needs. And, we've been able to, on several occasions, both learn of startup companies that folks are talking to through that avenue, and also suggest companies that folks should talk to instead. And may or may not result in an investment, but that's okay for us. We've been able to show that our ventures team can provide value in several different other ways, and that's been key to us to build up our strength and reputation inside Capital One.
That's great. So I see lots of questions here, and I want to try to pick off a few of them because these are very, very helpful for our discussion. And one of the things I see is questions about things like, how do you manage a portfolio company that's focused on serving your parent, or is potentially transformative, but is now to the point they want to expand to serving some of your competitors? So that's one question. And there's other questions related to that are around, I guess I'll ask this, but besides the strategic fit, you need a strong buy-in from the operations, and how does that look like? And so, I would just kind of toss out there as we think about these questions is that you may not have a requirement from your investment committee to get formal approval to invest, from a business unit person. It may or may not. But I know from many companies that it's often desirable to engage the business group in these types of things. So, any comments on those topics in terms of, kind of what is your thesis? How do you structure it? Who's involved when? And kind of how you handle it. And I guess what I'm trying to highlight here is the formal versus the informal systems that take place. It may not be part of your documented approved process, but it's really the way things work in engaging these networks.
Yeah, and I think I guess I picked up on another part to that question at the start. We have to be careful in CVC that we don't put too many shackles on our investment companies. And the businesses will want to engage, and they'll, maybe want to get first access to product, maybe a discount on product, maybe to influence where that product's headed. But we try and make it very clear within BP that these are startups that need to also live and land on their own. They need a multitude of customers, and sometimes those customers could be our competition. Because there might be a time where strategy changes in our corporations, and if that changes, you don't want your company being 100% of revenue for your startup. So have to be very careful. That's something that we've talked about in different leadership series across CVC and at GCB events from a commercial agreement standpoint. I think the second part of that question is in those scenarios where the business is engaged, it's trying to find that right fit of what does the startup need, and not just revenue, but it's sometimes tech insights and what would this look like and what should we build this product to, and trying to balance that with what your business needs as well. I know that's probably not as clear, but it is. You've got to kind of balance those, and each time it's a little bit different. Yeah, I'll pause there.
No, that's good. And to have a financially viable company that makes a difference in its disruptive technology deployment, you have to have, it's much better if you have multiple customers and not kind of be captive to just one customer, if you will.
Yeah. Can I add one thing onto that, Lee? This past year, my team did a pretty in-depth strategic versus financial success analysis. And it may sound obvious, but one of the key takeaways was that we found a really strong correlation in companies that were financially successful on the outside were, far more likely to be strategically successful inside Capital One. And so, I think it's a further proof point that, we want our companies to, succeed outside of the enterprise.
No, that's really essential. Another thing I want to talk about a little bit is you talked about kind of how you work with these various groups. When you talk about doing pilots, who pays for pilots? How does that happen, within your companies? And, I guess kind of, somewhat related to that is sometimes you get this experience of things kind of being thrown over the wall. I'd like to kind of hear a little bit about, how you manage those processes related to, pilots or portfolio company engagements, beyond just the pay for it. But I don't know if either of you have comments on that.
Sure, I'm happy to weigh in because I've worked here, at Capital One, and then I also have some experience at In-Q-Tel where it was slightly different in terms of how we structured investments. Here at Capital One, my team does not pay for pilots. So therefore it's even more important for us when we go to IC to have that champion and business leader with us that says, hey, this is super important to me. I'm prioritizing it. I can, put, this number of resources around it. This is kind of what our timeline looks like. That's really important, on the back end and post investment, we can kind of help manage and remove, roadblocks and such. But we don't actually fund pilots through our investments. If I can compare to some of my experience at In-Q-Tel, where In-Q-Tel has a bit of a different model where a lot of times they're formulating a development agreement for NRE type work with their investment. As such, they're funding the company to provide maybe some pilot licenses or preferred pricing, things of that nature in their development agreement. I think that's a mechanism to really accelerate that timeline to pilot. In that case specifically, it kind of incentivized those customers because they were, getting something for nothing, and I think that's a really interesting approach.
So from BP side, we've done something similar to Nicole. We never had a deployment budget. We wanted the business engaged. If they were going to pilot it, it would come from the business. We've changed that this year. We actually saw an opportunity to now start putting budget towards pilots. And where I would see this is for those early stage tech, maybe thinking about, I use the hydrogen example, to where we're not going to probably have a hydrogen hub again for 5+ years. So as a part of that, there's a multitude of technologies we're looking at, production technologies, transport technologies. And so we have, as part of our budget, we've got a small amount, about less than 10%, but a substantial amount of our budget that we're going to put towards probably 6 or 7 deployments this year, depending on the portfolio and what we invest in. and we'll see how that goes. I think it'll be a net positive in the long run. The challenge will be if you kind of provide that pilot, does it still get the business to be interested? I think it will, right? Successful pilot, de-risk it, and then the business is still engaging. But yeah, we've done that this year, and we're excited about it.
Yeah, that's great. There's some other interesting questions in the chat. I think you kind of addressed this one around, what do business groups fund versus what you guys fund. Also, an interesting question about how do you overcome established product roadmaps or plans that sometimes prevent business units from innovating with startups that may have the potential to leapfrog or advanced corporate strategy. And this is one of those things in your investment thesis in terms of what is your time horizon? Are you trying to invest for near term, long term? Do you have a mix? But any experience that you have with kind of managing some of these challenges with business groups, and how, and maybe also in there is who's engaged with your business groups. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that as well, and whether it's your network chat or Nicole, you mentioned some of the the key people in your supplier group, for example. But I'd love to hear an example from each of you around how you've approached some of these challenges of overcoming the internal inertia by providing some new optionality.
Yeah, it's been really key for us up front to be transparent on whether or not a startup company is bringing a new capability to Capital One, or whether or not it's replacing or augmenting potentially a homegrown solution, and or whether or not we're kind of co-building alongside that startup company. And what I mean by that is, are we really, feeding their product roadmap to enhance something to work specifically, for our enterprise at scale. So I think that transparency is the first thing I would highlight. And the other thing that's been key for us at Capital One is to make sure that, we've got really strong buy-in from product and tech leaders. At Capital One, it's been, super essential for both of those leaders to, kind of be in line on what the strategy is and the priority is. And I've seen, good partnerships, become really successful because of, that tight buy-in between those two teams.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, and I think from BP, we invest across the spectrum, seed to, as I said, mature commercial technology. Where we as ventures like to see the business most engaged is in that early stage, helping refining the product set, helping look at what markets could look like for that startup, and then also providing technical insights. That's where we see to be the most impactful. Now you could look further out when it's commercial and you want the business engaged, buying the product, scaling it. That's more revenue in dollars. But in the true sense, venture capital, we want to accelerate technology, find awesome technology, and move that. And that's where we use the Mavens, the Maven network, to really be engaged and feel empowered to work with our startups. And it works well.
Okay, that's great. I think then we'll go next to, let's see, there's a couple of questions here that are maybe a little bit more tactical, but it is important to understand is, questions about whether or not you take board seats and kind of how you manage the firewall between portfolio companies and the businesses so that you're maintaining your fiduciary responsibilities to the portfolio company as well as making sure that the corporation gets value from it. So comments on how you manage that?
Yeah, so we get this question a lot in CVC. The way that we've structured it in BP Ventures, for those companies that we have a board director seat, they sit on that board. They've got fiduciary responsibility to that board, and they want to see that company be successful. Their thought process on that board is daily. How do we grow, scale this business? We also then, on the other side of the fence, since we're talking about fences, we have a shareholder representative. And so that is someone that either would look after BP's interests in that company, if it's a follow-on investment, if it's an exit process, But also that individual, because they're not exposed to the board side, is also a key connect to our business and working with the business and finding opportunities to further leverage our business expertise into the startup. So we found that model works really well. And for those, sometimes we don't have a board seat. It would just be the shareholder rep that's supporting and perhaps an observer seat. But if we look across our portfolio, we're pretty heavy on board director seats. About 70% of our companies, we've got a board director seat.
Okay, thank you. So as we kind of have maybe another 10 minutes or so of Q&A and then some quick wrap up here, I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about things related to measuring strategic success and how you measure this. And so we've covered already kind of how you go about mapping and developing champions internally. We talked a little bit about co-creating and collaborating with other parts of your business, but I'm also really interested in hearing kind of how do you help create an environment of shared responsibility where impact is rewarded. So talk a little bit about your success metrics and kind of what you measure and what you're seeing.
Yeah, sure. So we've developed a pretty in-depth strategic value score framework to do this very thing. We found that it's been really important for us internally to be able to tell that story of strategic success and impact. It's mostly a qualitative framework. And, we think about things like, what did this investor relationship bring to the table? If the company is a vendor, what did that vendor relationship have for an impact on Capital One? And then also what learnings and, potential cultural impact to this investment bring? Did it help, shift or shape a strategy for Capital One? Did we get to a decision sooner, whether or not we, engaged in a commercial relationship or not? We also think about, from a quantitative perspective, how many potential resources did the startup company save Capital One? Did it save Capital One from, deploying many sprint teams on a particular effort, in the event that they were thinking of building something versus buying something? So that's been really important for us to think, as we try and, provide some quantitative data on the strategic value that our companies provide as well.
And similar to us, we've done both quantitative, qualitative. Where we can, we try and quantitative, we try and get a number to it. And we try hard at doing that, working with the business. Was this more production? Did this save people? Like Nicole was saying, did this save costs? And quantifying those. We see, power in doing that. But we also have number of deployments. Did this impact our strategy? But I would say, I would recommend, we like trying to quantify it from our side.
It sounds like there's a lot of things that you measure quantitatively and qualitatively, and an element of it does seem to be, measuring those activities before you can really tell if there's impact, because, obviously, the venture life cycle can be very long. If it takes 10 years to, bring something new to the market, you're not going to know for a very long time. So you probably have some proxy indicators along the way. So we have just a few more minutes here. We have covered most of those things. I guess, in terms of if you kind of step back and look at this, there's a few other questions that I want to just real quickly hit in the Q&A in the questions. So one was about the investors who, your company's investors who, the shareholders of BP and Capital One, and kind of how does corporate venturing play out in the public image of your companies? Is it part of your culture? Is it, is it related to an overall corporate strategy that is talked about by your board and your executives with your shareholders? Or how visible is it? Any comments on that?
You're going to get us in trouble with our investor relations folks, but no, the simplest way is yes, yes, and yes. Our team sits under strategy, and so we help deliver strategy, and that could be in the short term or that could be in the long term. We see it as a way to leverage our capital. Depending on the venture capital unit, you've got co-investors around the table. We've seen that equate to a 3 to 10x leverage. So it's a cost-efficient way to accelerate tech on behalf of our business's strategy. And that's how we pitch it. And thus far, it lines up very well with, our shareholders and our business strategy.
Yeah, I think that's probably a common answer. I'm going to go on to just one more question here, and as we're approaching, so sorry to cut you off there, Nicole, but one of the other questions that came up is, so what do you do when there's turnover in the groups that are responsible for these really good partnerships, and you lose your key ally who's in a critical role in the business? How do you manage that?
Oh gosh, I've got 100 different ways to answer that question. I don't know that there's a cookie cutter way, but I've got to say that's one thing that keeps me up at night in this job is if there's turnover and we lose an accountable executive, or AE as we call him here, it's hard, especially if you've got a new AE that's maybe shifting the strategy slightly, and then something becomes deprioritized. In my case, I find I'm more comfortable when there's multiple use cases across Capital One. So, maybe perhaps we're not totally reliant on one group or one AE. So building that redundancy, but also finding ways to get, buy-in from other leaders, whether it's, through your investment committee, or other key folks in Capital One that see this as a priority and they can help influence or nudge things along. But it's a great question.
Well, and I think that could be another topic for an entirely different webinar. And it's something that comes up in every course that we teach at the GCV Institute is, the management of communication and the engagement of this, this broader network is really as much art as it is science, and, super important to the longevity of corporate venture groups. And, it's one of the signs of success is being able to withstand not just the economic ups and downs, but also multiple executive transitions. And I know both of your companies have gone through C-level executive changes over the years, and that's one of the things that makes this really challenging and fun is how do you expand beyond just the one leader who sponsored the startup of the VC team to really something that is really integral to the success of the corporation and more visible as part of the fabric of the way things are done. We could go on and on. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to really go into more detail right now. We didn't get through all of the questions that were answered. We got through many of them. I believe I could speak for our co-panelists. We're all on LinkedIn. If you have specific questions, we'll try to reach out to those. We're also always looking for new ideas and topics to cover with the Institute. And if I could just in wrap up, any closing comments from Chad or Nicole, and then I'll go to a few kind of housekeeping slides as we wrap this up. So any last words of wisdom or advice from Chad or Nicole as we close this?
Just a quick one. It seems like a tall ask to integrate your ventures team into a large corporate, but there's a bit of you got to start. And I think the other side is it really realize that you're not going to be the expert. Try and pull in as much as possible the rest of the business to support. And what you'll find is when they're empowered, they want to do deals alongside you. And they're a stronger champion than you would be pitching that to their boss. And so, yeah, I think go get it. And hopefully this was helpful today.
I think my 2 cents, Lee, would be to, don't be afraid to ask your stakeholders and your startup companies for feedback. Like find out from them, like what you do, what's most valuable for them. We've done this a few times and, we've always had, great learnings and takeaways from it. And because of that feedback, we've been able to kind of shift and become more efficient. And especially if you're a strong team, you can structure your team, based on that type of feedback.
Hey, that is fantastic. And what a great piece of advice. I build on that by saying get feedback, not just from your portfolio companies, but also from the people in the depths of your organization that you collaborate and partner with, because their perspective is also crucial in the whole process. And that's another key learning that keeps coming up again and again in the courses that the Institute provides. So I want to thank both of you for doing a fantastic job of fielding lots of questions. We appreciate your time. We have a regular series of these webinars that take place. The next one is February 8th. We'll talk about venture building, why every corporation needs a venture building program and how to do it well. This is another topic that perennially pops up is, amongst those other activities besides pure equity investing, what should corporations focus on? So please be sure to mark your calendars on this. In terms of kind of another wrap up on this, we will share with you the link to the recording and some information about the upcoming series and other events. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions about this, and I'll be sure to respond. We look forward to seeing you in future events. We do have some other events coming up through GCV in the US, in the UK, in various times over the course of this year, and a full schedule of courses available through the GCV Institute on the website. And I appreciate your engagement and wish you all the best. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.